think that's where I got in realizing what I had done wrong in my recovery is because I would relapse. And I had to sit down and say, why do I keep doing this over and over? And I realized through relying on all things human, it was my disease lying to me, right? And eventually I would start using that as I'm not worth it to people. I can't live up to their expectations, and I would eat away at my self-worth, which was my disease, doing push-ups, just waiting for that moment of vulnerability, and I would go back out, right? It was just a horrible cycle, but now that I'm aware of it, I can really, I can stop. I can work on my internal condition without the external being what I rely on. And that was a huge change. Nobody can make me feel a certain way. It's my choice to react to that and what I do with what's going on, right? And that was a very hard lesson for me to actually accept and grow with, because I always wanted to be in that victim place and I could no longer rely on that. So my higher power really grounds me in making sure that I'm doing what I can for myself in my recovery, whether it's through prayer, meditation, pausing, which is a huge thing, no more reacting, and just doing the next right thing, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a work in progress for me.
Oh God,
I think for
day.
everyone, right?
Every day.
So my next one that I found really pertinent was like letting my disorder be a secret. And what I mean by this is, I can't tell you how many times maybe I've strung together a month or 3 months, and then I binge and I purge, and I have this little voice in my head that says, okay, Becca, if you just like shut up and tell no one and do the next right thing now, we can just forget that happened and carry on to day 31. And I think one, not living in my truth, so living as a dishonest person, is a trigger for me in general. I don't like that part of me. And so that causes a spiral, but every time I let my disorder be a secret, I like thrive. It thrives in that, right? Like it's the shame, the guilt, the self-pity, the self-loathing, like all that negative stuff, and I can try to push it down and push it down. And as I'm sure like you know, if you've ever tried to do that, if you suffer with an addiction or like any mental health problem like this, like it's not an easy thing to do. And it lands me like back in a treatment center or back in a therapist's office every time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I don't love it. I don't love
Yeah.
that you're in pain.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Thank you.
So another one of mine that's huge, and I still struggle with this today because my life needs to be about balance, is that I would switch to healthy habits that would become obsessions. So healthy eating, exercise, trying to get to where I wanted to be in life. Those goals would become obsessions, and it would end up being really destructive because I would stop focusing on my recovery, the things that were important, like meditation and prayer and rest and living in my truth, and I would start externally trying to control things through my work, trying to keep myself too busy, trying to look good, but not really fixing what was going on in the inside. We can look put together, we can look like we have it all together, but if inside your soul is still crying, you're not doing yourself any justice, really. People can give you all the compliments that you want, it really doesn't change what your self-esteem is. That's my experience anyway. So my eating disorder would spike. I would use any excuse to restrict, or eventually it would be purging, to kind of control that anxiety that I was feeling, because the other areas of my life I was not spiritually connected. This led to me being so vulnerable and so disconnected from my higher power. Once again, I was putting roadblocks in between me and my higher power, which didn't leave room for any sort of growth. I was just running myself dry. I wasn't fueling anything good. I was just kind of projecting my old addiction with a new addiction, I guess, if that would make any sense.
Yeah, and for me, like, even when you say with your eating disorder, like, I think for myself and for a lot of other people out there who have eating disorders or eating challenges, like, sometimes it starts with that healthy obsession, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like, oh, I just want to eat the right foods. Like, when I was trying to refeed myself from the anorexia, I just ate whatever I wanted. But then as soon as I got to my weight restored body, I was like, well, now I only want to eat the right foods, right? But it's like, but if I ate the wrong food ever, I'd have to vomit. So that obsession and me trying to do the right thing, which I thought was to be healthy, right? Like, just backfired. Like, it became completely unhealthy, and there's something called orthorexia, and I can definitely resonate with that, is only eating the right foods.
Yeah.
Or even something like exercise. I can have days where I struggle with that, where I'm not feeling well, but I'm like, exercise is a healthy thing. People are supposed to get some form of physical activity every day. So I push myself even when that's really not what I should be doing. Like, I need a day to rest or to care for myself, or I feel sick, right? So I think we're constantly bombarded with all these mixed signals about what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and how we're supposed to care for ourselves, that have personally made my recovery very confusing and challenging at times.
Absolutely. I think the big thing here is to keep an open mind, because once again, going back to the fact that your recovery and my recovery from an eating disorder are going to look very different, and that's okay. There's going to be foods that work for you that don't work for me, and vice versa, right? So I think when we open up this topic of recovery from eating disorders and even alcoholism, we really need to focus in on being positive to each person's journey and what's going on, and being open to trying different things, and being okay with the fact that something doesn't work for us anymore without allowing it to become an excuse. I just really want to drive that home.
Yeah, definitely. Another one for me is that I think my conception of recovery was just way too narrow. So for the longest time, I thought I was recovered if I just wasn't binging and purging. And the funny part about that is, like, I could be not binging and purging, but drinking and popping pills and doing lines all day, right? And that's no recovery either, right? Or not doing the drugs and the alcohol and not binging and purging, but weighing myself 10 times a day, measuring all my food, counting all my calories, right? Like, there's so many different facets of what recovery means to me now today, and it's like how I show up for people, how I show up for myself. Like, am I focused on myself because I don't want to be? Am I looking at what I can do for others? Like, that's where I want to be, right? Like, remove the selfishness of the disease.
Yeah. And being too narrow can also go in the direction of just thinking that eliminating the eating disorder behavior or the alcohol, drugs, is going to be the cure to everything. When people take alcohol away from me, my mind says everything's going to be fine. My life is going to build up and things are going to be good. But realistically, I am my problem. Alcohol was the solution to the problem. So you take away alcohol and I'm still self-pitying, I'm still filled with self-doubt, I'm still selfish, I'm still dishonest, I'm still these
full of fear.
Yeah, full of fear. I still have these issues that need to be addressed, and that's been a huge part of my recovery, is learning that and how to deal with those very real core issues, right?
Yeah, so like one activity that I'm going to be doing this week, and maybe anyone out there wants to do also, but it's like, what does recovery look like to me? Like, if I'm a recovered person, how do I show up in my everyday interactions? What is it like with my family, my friends, my partner at work? When I'm alone, you know, how do I interact with strangers? Like, I think those are all such important parts, and I really love Tony Robbins, and he does neurolinguistic programming, and he basically says, like, write that out, read it to yourself every day. Like, if you have a goal or like an end goal in mind, but you don't know what it really looks like when you're there, how do you know when you're there, right? So I need to, and I'm saying this for a commitment thing on my end, but get really straightforward about what it is for me that recovery is.
Very good. And I think the last point that we're going to talk about is thinking that I had to do recovery perfectly. Perfectionism for me is deadly. I cannot live in perfectionism, mostly because there is no such thing. Um, in life, we are going to make mistakes, and we usually learn from those mistakes, and they are beneficial to our process. But I was stuck in this mentality that any mistake I made was going to mean that I wasn't going to gain recovery, I wasn't recovered, I wasn't going to live the way that other people were living. And it would always send me into a spiral of depression and self-pity and everything that would make the alcohol seem like a great option again, and it really wasn't.
Well, where did perfectionism lie for you in the root of your illness? Because for me, it was like, I think the whole eating disorder started for me because of perfectionism. Right? So it's like, if that's the thing that got me sick, then of course it's going to be the thing keeping me sick in my recovery. But does that ring true for you? Or
see, that's an interesting point, because for me, my eating disorder developed as a result of something somebody had said to me about my body and how it was changing in my puberty years. So I wanted to stop that change in my body, which then became a control issue and kind of progressed, right? But I think that I've always had this sense of false pride, and I didn't really have a healthy ego. So I really wanted to make my image on the outside seem a different way than I was feeling on the inside, and they weren't congruent with each other. So as long as you thought that I was doing okay,
then you were doing okay.
Then I was doing okay. So that once again goes back to my internal condition was not changing, and I was not being authentic to myself, which kept me very sick. So in my journey, I would get in the 12-step program, we have a thing called the Step 9 Promises. All of these things would start happening for me. I would get my life back, I would have my friends, my loved ones, I would have work, I'd have all these things, but because my internal condition was not changing, I was still manifesting a reality of sickness. And I couldn't maintain sobriety due to that, right? Yeah, it's a very scary cycle to be stuck in.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm realizing now that my God, or my concept of God, is so creative that anything that I am going through, whether it's positive or negative, is happening so that I can use the tools that I know today, like prayer, meditation, helping others, going to therapy, doing these things. I can work those and show other people what this program and what the universe or a higher power can do for them. And that's how we teach people. Teaching people is not through talking about it most of the time, it's by showing and living by example. And I robbed myself of that experience a lot of the time, and robbed other people of that experience of seeing me grow just naturally in the process.
Yeah. And I've hidden so much of my own journey because of the shame, because of the self-disgust, because of the feelings of like inhumanness, right? Like, oh, nobody does with food what I do with food, right? Yeah. Meanwhile, it's like not every woman, but a lot of women I've spoken with, like who are in recovery, have and do struggle with that, right? So I think there's so much power in like being authentic. It's like, this is my fucking journey. This is how shit and crummy and amazing it's been all at the same time, right? And I'm living in that truth now.
You give that power, and I think that's so important, because by staying silent about these things and not living in it and not showing it, it makes other people feel like they have to have shame, they have to hide these things.
Yeah.
So as soon as we start being open and honest, I think people can go, oh wow, I've been there, I've had that experience, and then gives them a platform to start addressing it or start living their own truth.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So anyways, we hope that in listening to this, you've decided to write it down and to not do all of these things. If you do that, it will make everything a lot easier. And I have to look at this every single day of my life, I think, because I do these things still to this day, right? So this was a super helpful episode for us to do, for me in my own recovery, and I really hope that you got something from it.
Ditto.
That's a wrap, folks.